Hi, everyone. Um, we've made it through our first week, and hopefully, everyone has gotten the textbook and has started reading. We've started out this first week kind of easy and kind of slow, looking at the first chapter and kind of getting a little bit of an idea of the perspective of where biological anthropology is coming from and looking a little bit at the historical roots of biology in general, but also of biological anthropology. So, first, the one question we haven't really even addressed yet is what is biological anthropology? Well, biological anthropology is a um, field within anthropology, within the major discipline of anthropology. And the American approach to anthropology is this four field approach. And by that we mean that in American anthropology, you have cultural anthropology, linguistic anthropology, archaeology, and then biological anthropology. And they're all housed within the same department. And as a biological anthropologist, I've had significant coursework in archaeology and cultural anthropology. Not so much in linguistics because it is a little bit harder to find strong departments that in linguistics. Linguistics tends to be a little bit um, really, I guess the American approach is more of a um, three field, but also you can also include a fifth field of applied anthropology. And um, the department here has a number of um, stellar applied anthropologists as faculty members. Anyway, so biological anthropology falls within anthropology, of course, and the big picture of biological anthropology is that we try to understand humans and their closest relatives. Um, the cool thing about biological anthropology is that we, um, you know, we look at biology, but we also try to understand the intersection and the interrelatedness of biology and culture because humans are unique in that we have culture. So, back to that question of, well, what is biological anthropology? Well, it's that branch of anthropology that studies humans and non human primates and asks questions about why are we the way we are? How did we get here? And so, some examples of what biological anthropologists might specialize in. For example, I do molecular anthropology. I'm a geneticist, basically. I study human genetic variation. I study genomic data and genomic variation. I look at all the way from variation within DNA to what we call the transcriptome and how variants within the DNA ultimately shape the phenotype. But we'll come back to that later. So, molecular anthropology is looking at genetic variation and genomic variation. But I started out as a classic, teeth and bones, skeletal biology. So, looking at skeletal variation, dental variation, looking at one of my particular passions is what is called bioarchaeology or and paleopathology, looking at skeletal remains and reconstructing past lives the life of that individual and the health, not just the death. Yes, often looking at evidence of what may have been the cause of death or what killed that individual, but reconstructing their life from um, health and disease during childhood, times of stress, physiological stress during childhood, all the way through adulthood. Um, so that's an example of what a biological anthropologist might do. Or forensic anthropology. And forensic anthropology is interesting because it spans applied anthropology and biological. So forensic anthropologists have expertise in skeletal biology or human osteology. Um, but they also have understandings of human behavior, human psychology, and pathologies. So forensic anthropology, primatologists. Primatology is within biological anthropology, and primatologists study primates, non-human primates. So monkeys, apes, um, prosimians, um, which would be like lemurs, lorises, and galagos. And we'll look at those more closely when we'll do a chapter in a section on non-human primates. Um, Other things that biological anthropologists study are things like, well, health and nutrition, or um, craniofacial variation. So there's any number of things that biological anthropologists focus on, and we'll kind of get uh, introduced to the different subdisciplines. So, how does this relate to Chapter 1, and what are the critical points of Chapter 1? So, I think everybody has gotten an idea about that. Biological anthropology is a science. We use the scientific method. So science isn't necessarily a thing. Science is a method. It's a rational and logical approach to understanding the world around us. And so hopefully you've watched that fun little video. I know everybody's taken the quiz and emailed it to me, so that's awesome. And then your textbook has a very good discussion about what is science. And then I've included a number of slides within this PowerPoint presentation, just kind of reiterating what the process is in science. So yeah, biological anthropologists use scientific methodology to, um, you know, well, one of the sub disciplines that I didn't mention that biological anthropologists that's within biological anthropology would be paleoanthropology, and all those fabulous fossils that we keep finding, and so reconstructing past human ancestors, um, and we use the scientific method. It's the scientific approach to reconstruct the anatomy of past humans, to understand the relationships between the various what we call hominins. So how is Lucy related to a Neanderthal? Where does Lucy fit into our human tree? So we use the scientific methodology. So moving on so hopefully as you're working through the chapters and reviewing this PowerPoint, it'll kind of highlight the critical points. Something that you'll notice throughout the quarter that is consistent throughout biological anthropology and the various subfields and subtopics within biological anthropology, that everything is based on an evolutionary framework. So, evolution as a theoretical framework. As a biological anthropologist, we don't want to just describe the characteristics of humans and non-human primates. We really want to understand what shaped those features. Why do we see the traits that we see? Why do humans have particular behaviors? Why do they have particular physiological features? So we don't want to just describe. Same thing with non-human primates. We want to really understand how we as humans and our relatives, our close relatives, the non-human primates, how we came to be the way we are. So we ask questions such as, well, is this particular characteristic, is it an adaptation? Does it provide an advantage? What might have increased the frequency of this particular trait in past populations? So I'll just introduce the idea here at this point that we use this idea, this concept, this theory of evolution as a framework to base our hypotheses on, and to test and to shape how we test our hypotheses. So some of you might be asking, well, isn't evolution just a belief, just like creationism is a belief? Beliefs and logical frameworks are two very different things. And evolution is based on a logical framework. It's based on science. It's based on the scientific method. So there's a huge difference between a belief and a belief system versus this scientific logical framework where our hypotheses and our theories are based on what we call empirical evidence. So actual evidence, testable evidence. But again, we'll kind of look at this throughout the whole quarter, that that really the theories and the hypotheses that will be presented and the information presented throughout the quarter is really couched within this evolutionary framework. So we'll ask questions like, well, why are humans bipedal? So what do I mean by bipedal? Why do humans walk on, two legs. So we're bipeds, we're bipedal. One of the big questions is, well, why are we bipedal? Well, we can't just say, well, we're bipedal because we are. We look at bipedalism as it was probably advantageous in our past, in our evolutionary past, and it's been selected for. Bipedalism is an adaptation. So how did it come about? What advantage did it provide? What was the selective pressure? And how did our non-bipedal ancestors get around? So we'll be looking at things like that when we cover the chapter on our 2 chapters on paleoanthropology. So anyway, Just keep in mind that throughout the quarter that we really are going to be using this theoretical framework of evolution. So that said, um, this first chapter introduces you to um, Charles Darwin and gives you a little bit of a historical perspective of um, why was Charles Darwin's theory of evolution so significant. And as you saw from the movie, Charles Darwin was not the only one that uh, published a theory of evolution. Wallace actually came up with a theory of evolution as well. But what we'll see is that Charles Darwin's significant contribution wasn't so much saying that, hey, species change over time, species evolve. It was providing a mechanism to explain how evolution could happen. And that was the huge, eloquent contribution of Charles Darwin. So if we really start at the beginning and we look at some of the very early thinkers, Aristotle believed that each species had this immutable essence. So what does immutable mean? Immutable is meaning unchanging. It's an essence that can't be changed and that doesn't change. So clearly, not thinking that species evolve, and certainly not that one species could change enough that a new species would arise. With the Renaissance, we see the foundations for modern science being laid. Um, there was kind of a rediscovery and a reawakening of thinkers, and as people started to travel more widely, circumnavigation, so sailing around the world, they started encountering non-Western people and started really trying to um, pin down what makes us human. How do we define humans and humanity? And and there started to be this realization that the world was filled with variation and diversity, and that the world was constantly changing. But how could they explain that? And why would this be seemingly so difficult to embrace and to explain? It's important to keep in mind that up through the mid 1800s, church doctrine provided biblical explanations about biological diversity. Um, there was still a very strong relationship between theology and science, or between theology and naturalists. Most of the naturalists were theologians. And so, again, biblical explanations for biological diversity. And really, the two key theological concepts or biblical concepts that were widely, pretty much um, uniformly accepted, were what we call a separate creation. So this means that all creatures were created separately from one another by God, and that they were organized into a hierarchy, what's called the great chain of being. And this was pretty much what everyone understood. And these two principles, or these two ideas, are what um, ruled science and theology. And so, back to this idea of the great chain of being, what this was that all species could be organized into a hierarchy of increasing complexity and increasing perfectionism, with, of course, man near the top. The angels were above man, but man was right up there at the top of the hierarchy. And this was so during the 1700s, mid to late 1700s, early 1800s, there were a number of individuals who were starting to question, um, first, the immutability of species, this idea that they never changed, and they were starting to question that, for example, that the Earth was only 6,000 years old. Um, and these individuals set the stage for Darwin. They, they shaped his thinking considerably and contributed to his view and his questioning and his scientific inquiry. Because Darwin himself went to seminary. Darwin was a theologian and a naturalist, um, and but these early thinkers that started questioning church doctrine and started even questioning that and suggesting evolution, all influenced Darwin's thinking.